so much rich here. We have time for some questions. I'll take 2 or 3 at a time so that we can maximize. Keep your questions short, no 6-part questions and no long statements, please. Back here, and then we'll go over here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, if this is dependent on growth, what would happen if the commodity boom were to slow down or bust with these middle class? By your definition, they are not so vulnerable to go back to poverty. Do you think that public policy can make a change in keeping them in the middle class?
And then over here.
Very well presented, very valuable. It seems, except for a couple slides, abstracted from questions of who owns the land, who owns the law, who owns the money, who owns the technology, who owns the media. The World Bank itself, of course, has been doing good work, but is also very famous for funding mega projects which are bad for the environment, imposing huge debt, and just cutting back on social services. So I'd like to ask about the role of the World Bank in encouraging what I call a mutual class.
What?
Mutual class. To move beyond the middle class, which is for many people a treadmill, going faster and faster. People fall off of trying to maintain a level of consumption. But instead, it enables through cooperatives to meet needs with less per person, per capita income.
So, no, I wanted to ask you about 2003. They keep showing that's a magic year, and was that the same for all countries, or the year with this? And what is it about that? And the other question has to do with this interesting finding about the formal employment and taxation. And I wanted to comment to you about the role of the state in producing this. And it used to be that there was for a while it was this emphasis on informality as a force of development, and now what you're showing is really formal employment that's decreasing inequality, and taxation and the role of the state in recently.
3 questions that are well clustered together around questions of politics, public policy, the state and action. So I'll turn take this over to you.
The questions are probably much better than the answers will be. Let me be quite quick and therefore possibly a bit superficial. The question on what if growth stops is an excellent question, and in fact it's one that's pressing in the president of Brazil's mind very much these days, because growth has kind of stopped in Brazil. And I think what will happen is, it's not obvious to me that unless there's a very big recession, it's not obvious to me that these things will be reversed. But the speed of further mobility will fall dramatically, I think. So what we would see is another stagnation at a higher plateau, where the people going to fancy restaurants in Santiago, Buenos Aires, and Lima will not go down to where it was before, but it will not keep rising at the speed at which it is kept rising now. Your question about who owns things, so there's 2 parts, right? Who owns things, and so the role of property ownership and political dominance on the one hand, and then the World Bank. So let me answer the first part. They are hardly even here, right? Even at the very top tail of the distribution. We know from many countries, most of this research I'm aware of has not been done in Latin America, it's been done in other places, but we know that in most places, survey compliance rates at top coded districts is very low. These people don't even answer the door to answer the questions of the survey. They don't have time, or they don't want to answer them. They're not at home when you call. They're harder to get to. And often if they do, they'll underreport things, either deliberately or because they only report their labor income or whatever. So they're not even there to some extent. If they were there, they'd be amongst the rich. I mean, this middle class at $50 a day are not not terribly rich. They're not badly off, but they are, I'd suspect most of us in this room either are now or will be above that at some point. So and I don't know that there's any evidence to suggest that that has become very different. I mean, it's always been a very land ownership has been always concentrated, capital ownership has been concentrated, and I suspect it remains concentrated. One of the previous speakers in this series, I understand, was Thomas Piketty, who talked about the top 1% and work they've done. There's an Argentine, young Argentine economist called Facundo Alvaredo, who's doing most of that work for Latin America at the moment. In Latin America, we've given them very little access to Social Security and fiscal data, which is what they need to look at that, because they know about the survey compliance problem. So they look at the top 1% by looking at administrative tax data, which is given to them without names, anonymized, and that, you know, it's not easy to get. In Latin America, I know they've got it for Argentina. I believe they've got some for Colombia. It's little. I don't know the findings yet, but I would not be surprised if this decline in inequality is not happening at the very top. Now, that doesn't mean that power will remain the same. One anecdotal piece on that. Have you heard, you know about soap operas in Brazil, yeah? They're big manifestations of popular culture. There's one recently called Avenida Brasil, okay, where the heroes are the low middle class, people moving from the Zona Oeste in Rio de Janeiro. Eventually, one of them moves to Ipanema, but doesn't like it, moves back. Yeah? This didn't used to happen. I mean, global goes where the consumers are, and politics will to some extent too. So the fact that real ownership remains very concentrated does not, in my view, mean necessarily that power will remain that concentrated. Maybe. So there's some hope of this growth of the middle class. The World Bank, I mean, I love being away from Washington because I don't have to defend the World Bank. So let me not defend the World Bank. But let me say, just as a matter of my personal opinion as a researcher, that the World Bank you seem to have in mind is more a World Bank of the 1980s and early 90s during structural adjustment than it is today. But we can discuss that afterwards. 2003. Yeah, great question. I mean, some people at the bank suspect it was, this also was the year when commodity prices started rising dramatically. To what extent all of this is really growth pickup due to a commodity supercycle is a question that remains to be answered. I'm not aware of a good macro paper that has looked at that question. It's a possibility. The PT will tell you that it was the rise of Lula, right? So I don't know what the answer is. I suspect it may have more to do with the commodity supercycle than with Lula, but there were a number of things changing at that time. I don't know what the answer is. Formality of employment, yeah, it's an incredible thing. I mean, one big challenge, and other people here in this room may know the answer better than me, but you know what Brazil has done with formal employment and the minimum wage, the real minimum wage at the same time, kind of beggars belief a little bit. I think there's some, I don't understand how we've been able to raise minimum wages so substantially whilst increasing both employment and formal employment. And whether that is something that can continue in the absence of growth is an interesting question too. I don't have the answer to that. Taxation and the role of the state, as I say, it's an issue of which of these equilibria we choose to be in. I do want to say one thing though about Brazil and Argentina. You see, the Brazil and Argentina are not like the other countries in terms of taxation. Unfortunately, it's not entirely evident that they provide gigantically better public services than the other countries either. So it's not obvious that Brazil and Argentina, I mean, I did not mean to say that Brazil and Argentina are already in the good equilibrium. They tax and they deliver services, but not obvious that there isn't some amount of inefficiency going on in there.